partnered with JetBlack. You've been sponsored by them for a while. JetBlack have just recently announced their Volt Smart Trainer, which is fantastic. You hark back to where you had the wheel-on trainer, which is way back in the day. When did you first ever get your first smart trainer? I mean, because we've probably taken you back a bit now.
Yeah, well, the first, I want to say it was about 2000 might have been 2009 or 10, those first trainers where you took your back wheel out and put them on, and they had some sort of drive system. I don't even think we could classify those as smart trainers though, because they didn't really connect to anything other than your own power meter. But it was probably, I want to say it was 09, maybe 10 or 11, that the style of trainers that we see now, quite heavy. They don't move around like the old trainer. And you get a really nice sort of feel when you're riding. It's a very close simulation to what you get when you ride on the road. And for me, that was the big advancement. One of the big advancements in indoor training was these trainers now felt very close to riding on the road. Whereas you would remember those trainers, you know, you'd put your back wheel on the roller. Sometimes they would slip
I used to sandpaper my back tire a couple of times to give it a bit more life and a bit more grip.
I was the same. You'd rough it up and then it would grip the roller a bit better. But your power would also fluctuate a little bit. So I just think, one of the great technologies we've seen is the improvement in trainers. But for me, it was probably a decade ago. And then more so, I guess when Zwift came in, I started riding. And, you know, now being a dad and having 3 kids, my wife's back working full time, and a lot of training I do is based around the family timetable, not just this is the training I'm going to do and everything else can wait. So often I'm riding in the dark, or I'm riding early in the morning, later at night. So for me, it's been a real revelation. But to be honest with you, Bev, mate, I saw a huge shift in the indoor training revolution, even pre-pandemic. I mean, having a coaching business and working with athletes who live in cities like Manila or Singapore or Hong Kong, these big urban environments where it was in the middle of the week, you would have to, I mean, a lot of these athletes would tell me on weekends they could get in the car and drive half an hour to a quieter area. But midweek with a busy job and family commitments, you just didn't have the time. If you had 80 minutes, you wanted to ride that whole 80 minutes. So there was I think just with all these different softwares coming in, and just how good the trainers are now, I saw a big shift to indoor training 5 or 6 years ago. And I mean, Andy Potts was probably the first pro I think he was with CompuTrainer, and he was exclusively riding and running indoors every day. But I remember, here's an Andy Potts story, 2013, I was in Colorado training, and he was in Colorado Springs. I was in Boulder, he was in Colorado Springs. But that was the year we had the one in 100-year storm in Boulder, and the whole town flooded. All the roads were ruined, and I'd had a rough build up that year anyway. My wife ended up in hospital in Boulder. She got shingles. It had been a rough few months, but I finally got to training, and then this flood hit, and it was impossible to train in Colorado. So I decided to go out to Kona even earlier than I normally would. And I've actually flew in to Kona with Andy Potts. We arrived on the same flight, and we're there waiting to get our luggage at the baggage carousel, and we've got our stuff. And I said to him, mate, do you want to share a cab in the town? Or he said, no, I'm still waiting on some luggage. And he had so much luggage. I'm like, what could you possibly be waiting on? And he was waiting on his CompuTrainer. He'd brought it out from home. And I'm like, mate, we're in Hawaii. There's no
problems about indoor training.
You don't have to ride indoors. But his training was so dialed in. And I mean, he's a guy who's super consistent. And I want to say even was it 2019, he got a top 10 as a 40-year-old.
Oh, totally. And he finished well in a race just the other day. He was competitive still. He might even put his hand up for a Collins Cup wildcard.
Well, you never know. I think it was Tulsa. Was it Tulsa or one of those big races? He was in the top 5. And he's trained exclusively indoors, cycling and running. And of course, Lionel trains indoors. So I think a lot of athletes now see the benefit of it.
Okay, so if smart trainers were a new evolution and you got onto that, with JetBlack, we've got a rocker plate and we've also got a turn block as well. So, I mean, I'm going to, for those listeners that don't actually know that Crowie is a qualified physiotherapist, he does profess to having used that degree to help his own training over the years. But as we mentioned in our other interviews with Crowie, nobody will let him near them to actually treat an injury. But you've always been interested in the biomechanics, the physiology, and so forth. That's was your your qualifications as such. You've ridden the rocker plate and you've used the turn block. So talk to me about that as a change of indoor riding experience.
Yeah, again, I just think it's the next step in trying to make indoor riding simulate as closely as possible all the feels that you get outdoors. And of course, you can do that from a cardiovascular standpoint. Yep. You can work yourself extra hard.
Yeah.
And you can also get it from a neuromuscular standpoint, the pedaling technique and all of those things. But I just think the final piece in the puzzle, making indoor riding as close as outdoor riding is just engaging that core. And what I noticed last year when, during the pandemic, I was doing a lot of riding with different groups all around the world, and we built up to 3 and 4 hour rides. Wow. And of course, then they're not super high intensity rides. There's tempo sections in the middle of them, but I think one of the things I noticed is that you can just turn your core off when you're riding for that length of time on an indoor trainer, and you can almost zone out. And one thing I really found, firstly with the front wheel block, that the turn block, was you had to use a bit of your core, and then especially with the rocker plate, even more so. And what you found was that if your core got lazy and turned off, you got flat spots in your pedal stroke.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so it was, for me, and mate, I want to say I do 90% of my riding indoors now. Just because of the family and a couple of the other businesses that I'm involved in. I just don't get the time to go out anymore. And so I'm doing 90% of my riding. And that was one of the things that I felt when I jumped back on the outdoor bike, or jumped back on the bike and went outdoors, that I felt that I'd missed that core engagement and cornering and shifting weight a little bit. So that's one thing the rocker plate brought in for me, was just turning that core on again. And it was interesting. I could really feel when I engaged the core and turned it on, I just really smoothed out my pedal stroke again. I felt like I wasn't having those flat spots. But, when I do my really hard top end power efforts, I take my trainer off the rocker board. But if I'm doing a longer ride with some tempo efforts, I'm going to be on there for 80 minutes or more, I always use the rocker plate, because I just think it just brings in that last piece of the puzzle. You've got the cardio workout, you've got the neuromuscular, but you've also got to have that core engagement to make yourself an efficient and effective rider. But it was one of the things that I liked about JetBlack, I guess even before their rocker plate, was just the whole like indoor suite. Like you get a mat, you get a turning block, you get a little table there. If you're going to be on the trainer for a while, you need to be able to set your tablet or your device up. You need your gels, your drink bottles. You don't want to be jumping on and off the bike. They've also got a fan coming out. So it's the whole indoor training suite, which I just think anyone who's trained a lot indoors knows that, you've got to make it as pleasant as possible, get a bit of airflow coming and be able to reach your drink bottles, reach your gels. So I think JetBlack really put a lot of time into their sort of their R&D, their product development in terms of setting up the whole indoor environment to make it just a more enjoyable experience.